And that midair crash of the American Airlines flight and a military helicopter that took the lives of all 67 people involved. Transportation officials held a news conference several hours ago and one day after recovering the black boxes from both of those aircraft.
Sarah Walsh is live in our news center with the latest tonight. Hi, Sarah.
Karina, good evening. And we're learning in the seconds before the crash there was an increase in pitch by the American Airlines flight, which could indicate that the pilot tried to avoid the helicopter at the last second. But that's all part of this investigation into what caused this disaster.
So as many of you guys already know, right now at this moment in time, we had an incident in Washington, D.C. at RFK Airport where a military helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, ended up colliding with a commercial airline, and that resulted in the deaths of everybody involved. I believe that as of right now, it is 67 people in total, including 60 passengers on the plane, 4 crew members on the plane, and the 3 that were in the military helicopter. It's an absolute disaster of epic proportions, and a lot of people have jumped to their political camps in order to blame things that they were already against. We heard a lot about the impact of DEI that could have potentially led to this crash. However, a bunch of different people have pointed out that the air traffic controller in question happened to be a white person. Therefore, the conversations about DEI are completely over. We're not going to talk at all whatsoever about the understaffing issue at the FAA. Oh wait, no, we definitely are going to talk about that, because it turns out just having a white person in a position doesn't mean that certain initiatives that were taken prior to that day didn't ultimately end up contributing to the disaster that we saw. So what we're going to actually talk about today is a program that actually removed anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 qualified white applicants from the FAA, from air traffic control, and essentially put the remaining controllers, who are greatly understaffed at 300 plus airports across the United States of America, to work 6-hour days, to work more than 10-hour shifts, and of course have increased all the different various problems that we've seen, all these different near hits in commercial airports in the United States of America. But before we get into that, I will remind you that my friend Devin Tracy, his parents recently lost their home in the California wildfires. He has started a GoFundMe in order to raise money for them. The link to that is in the top of the description. If you want to support him, please do. If you can't or don't want to, I understand. I'm just trying to help a friend.
We will find out what happened.
The NTSB says the flight data recorders and cockpit recorders have been recovered and are now being analyzed to get a clearer picture of what happened in the moments before the Black Hawk helicopter collided with the American Airlines flight and crashed into the icy Potomac River, killing 67 people.
At 8:47:58, the crew had a verbal reaction, and FDR data showed the airplane beginning to increase its pitch. Sounds of impact were audible about 1 second later, followed by the end of the recording.
So the case that I'm going to be citing from throughout the course of this video is actually called Brigada v. Buttigieg, but I do want to make something 100% clear. The program that we're actually talking about, its inception was back in 2012, it started in 2013, and it appears to have ended via congressional law back in 2018. It just so happens that they're suing the Transportation Department, and at the time that they were certified as a good class that was able to file this complaint, Pete Buttigieg was the secretary of that very department. So make no mistake about this. This actually goes back to the Obama administration, his second term, not the Biden administration. And here's where we run into problems, because there's an organization called the National Black Coalition of Federal Aviation Employees, or NBC-FAE. And back in 2012, what they realized is that there were too few, in their opinion, black air traffic controllers in the United States of America, and obviously the great fallacy, the entire premise of woke, is that any kind of disparity in outcome must be due to some form of discrimination as a part of the inputs. It cannot be that Asians and whites were passing the cognitive test that is 8 hours long, by the way, that is required to be an air traffic controller, more so than black and Hispanic and female applicants. It has to be evil white racism that was in the system. So what this organization essentially did was lobby the Obama administration and the Transportation Department to change up the standards from what we had previous since about the 1990s, which is a very stringent 8-hour cognitive exam, to something called a biographical information quiz as the thing that would lead off whether or not you would be determined to be in the FAA in terms of an air traffic controller. And it might seem like this is no big deal if you're a dumb idiot, but in reality, reality and actuality, this particular biographical information exam was designed deliberately to exclude white people and qualified people from it. And in fact, the only reason that black applicants were able to pass this exam is because it was discovered that the National Coalition of Black Aviation Employees was actually cheating on this exam, giving them answers in memos that are so insane, so blatantly written to be discriminatory, it kind of boggles the mind. So first, we need to understand a little bit about the hiring process for air traffic controllers so that you guys can understand exactly how disastrous these changes were. So obviously there was a requirement of some kind of education prior to you being able to take the exam. It was called the Air Traffic Control Selection and Training Examination, and you had to get an 85 or above out of 100 in order to be considered a well-qualified employee on the AT-SAT. However, the person who actually ended up filing this lawsuit managed to score 100% on this examination, and to be clear, this is an 8-hour qualification exam. It is the real deal. It is legitimate. However, again, that National Black Association of Aviation Employees realized that black applicants were not doing as well as white applicants, so essentially they conspired in order to undercut this with this ridiculous biographical examination. Now, allegedly in response to outside pressure over the course of 2012 and 2013, the FAA conducted a barrier analysis for ATCS positions to determine whether the existing process served to discourage hiring minority applicants, though the plaintiffs characterized this as deeply flawed and outcome-driven. The report determined that African American applicants only comprised 5% of the CTI pool compared to the average of 34% of African American representation across the non-CTI applicant sources. Now, in response to this is where we get the biographical information test as a replacement or as the first thing that you would see in terms of the application process. But in addition to that, they actually paused all hiring for these positions related to the original test during the process where they were working to implement this biographical exam that again was lobbied for by the African American Aviation Association. And this became incredibly problematic because you had a bunch of people who went to university, who scored high on their test, who seemed like they would be qualified to be air traffic controllers, and guess what? They were not hired during the course of this pause because nobody was hired during the course of this pause. Now, of course, if you are a high qualified, high IQ individual who is doing well on these cognitive tests, you can't just pause your life and wait around for years in order for the FAA to straighten out what's going on. You obviously are going to go to a different job, and this is one of the reasons why the estimates vary so greatly on how many people were actively discriminated against by the FAA, again, between 1 and 3,000 people. But again, ever since this point in time, this moment in history, air traffic controllers have been greatly understaffed in the United States of America. And again, as this was occurring because of the overworking of the current air control staff, what ends up happening is that the instances of near hits are going up dramatically. And this is absolutely crucial because even this pause, even this assessment right here, created a problem that we would be feeling the effects of for years. But unfortunately, it was not just this pause. Unfortunately, it was not a temporary thing where they realized the error of their ways, and after 6 months, they ended up solving this. They actually implemented these changes and continued to actively discriminate against qualified applicants for years, which again ultimately ends up deterring people who are qualified from applying in the future. So this has devastating effects. Now, plaintiffs have alleged that the FAA violated Title VII when it purged the merit-based hiring preferences for qualified applicants for air traffic controllers with the intent and purpose of benefiting African American air traffic controller applicants and hindering the class members. The FAA violated Title VII when it implemented a, quote, biographical questionnaire into the 2014 air traffic controller hiring process with the intent and purpose of benefiting African American air traffic controller applicants and hindering the class members. The plaintiffs claim that in doing so, the FAA refused to accept accept the outcome of a race-neutral hiring process solely because the racial makeup of the successful applicants, and in its place created a new race-motivated hiring scheme. Now, according to this complaint, when they first implemented the biographical information test as the standard to what they were going to look for these air traffic controllers, before you had to take the cognitive exam, only 14% of the applicants, of the 4,000, by the way, that took the test, ended up passing the test. And considering this was designed not to assess qualifications for an air traffic controller, the fact that you're eliminating 86% of the people that may or may not be qualified for this position is an absolute disaster, especially when you consider that this was wholly motivated by increasing the number of a certain racial demographic in this particular position. But it actually gets significantly worse. The questionnaire awarded applicants in a fashion untethered to the qualification necessary to be an air traffic controller. For instance, applicants could be awarded 15 points, the highest possible value for any question, if they indicated that their lowest grade in high school was in a science class. But applicants received only 2 points if they had a pilot's certificate, and no points at all if they had a control tower operator rating, even though historic research data indicated that those criteria had, quote, a positive relationship with ATCS training outcomes. Further, if applicants answered they had not been employed at all prior to these 3 years, they received 10 points, the most awarded points for that question. Just think about how crazy that is. If you have a pilot's license, then 2 points. That's it. That's all you got. If you have experience related to air traffic control, 0 points. But what you get a lot of points for, 15 points, is for failing a high school science exam. What you get a lot of points for, again 10 points, is being unemployed for the past 3 years. What kind of nonsense is this? Now, the reason Andrew Brigida, a Caucasian male and resident of Arizona, and an August 2013 graduate of the Arizona State University CTI institution, is suing is because in 2013, he passed the AT-SAT with the top possible score of 100%. So quite literally the most qualified that you can be. Following the FAA's changes to the air traffic controller hiring process, though, he took and failed the newly implemented biographical questionnaire in 2014. Plaintiff Matthew Douglas Cook, a Native American male and resident of the state of Washington, and a December 2013 graduate of another CTI institution, also passed the AT-SAT, recording the top numerical score possible of 100%, and he too subsequently failed the questionnaire. Neither Brigida nor Douglas Cook were hired by the FAA as an air traffic controller. It's absolutely crucial for you guys to understand out there in the audience that I do not give a damn about anybody's race or ethnic origin when it comes to being qualified to do air traffic control. Here you have 2 individuals that joined together for this lawsuit and ultimately ended up creating a class of largely white individuals. But as you heard right there, they both got perfect scores on the test that actually determines if you're qualified to be an air traffic controller, an 8-hour cognitive test that is extremely difficult, and they were not hired due to this biographical questionnaire. One of them happened to be white, which is the target demographic that they were actively trying to discriminate against. The other one happens to be a Native American. And if you think I only care about Brigida and not the Native American who also scored 100% on this, you are sadly mistaken. I want the most qualified people regardless of race. I have no issue with the 5% black air traffic controllers that existed previous, because guess what? They all passed that cognitive exam and therefore they were qualified for those positions. But these 2 individuals, again, regardless of race, based on the fact that the Black Aviation Association wanted to artificially boost the number of black air traffic controllers, were not able to get through despite their perfect score. Now, in addition to all the ridiculous things that you would get points for and lose points for that I already told you about, here's a couple of other ones actually reported quite well by TYT of all places, and I'd like to play that for you as well.
Yes, if science was your lowest score, you got an advantage. Insanity. If you had less experience, it was an advantage. If you were recently unemployed, it was an advantage. If you don't take, I mean, I know Anna listed it, but just think about it. You don't take criticism well, your air traffic control. They have to be able to criticize you at significantly and immediately. Get the freaking plane out of the way, right? This is not one of those things that you could have a discussion about it 12 days later. We gotta go. The other one was you don't speak out much. At air traffic control, you have to speak out. That's like issue number one, speak out, right? Why would you test for things that give you much worse competency? Because in their mind, and I would argue it's actually super ironically racist assumptions,
Yep.
right? They're like, oh, black people are probably gonna be bad at this job. So let's design a questionnaire to find the crappiest candidates so we can find more. No, who are these monsters?
It's absolutely crazy in every possible way. But in addition to that, to make things absolutely that much worse, the National Black Coalition for Federal Aviation Employees actually helped its members cheat on this exam in order to get them through by leaking these answers to these questions, because spoiler alert, they're all counterintuitive answers that nobody with any kind of brain would purposely answer correctly, because the correct answers are absolutely 100% incorrect for qualifications for the job. But again, we have phone calls, emails, memos, all of this information discovered through the discovery process in this lawsuit that shows this absolutely 100% did happen. Now, of course, this organization cheating on a federal exam is actually a federal crime and could have been prosecuted by an inspector general, by the Department of Justice, but guess what? They did not get prosecuted for this. There were no consequences. The Obama administration, when this was discovered, said no big deal, nothing to worry about, and obviously, unfortunately, the Trump administration also did not decide to open this case back up and pursue this. But make no mistake about it, if Georgia teachers can be charged with RICO in the state of Georgia for cheating on standardized tests for kids in instances that honestly don't matter all that much, it just so happened they happen to get bonuses if their students did better, then you can definitely charge them with the federal crime that they committed by giving these answers to this ridiculous test to their members, and explicitly, by the way, saying in those memos that these answers were for black applicants, minority women applicants, and definitely not for non-minorities, aka not for whites. So why does this absolutely matter? Well, again, it should be obvious. You have thousands of applicants that could have been qualified, that graduated from the appropriate university, being filtered out based on this biographical information assessment test that's absolute junk and absolute garbage. You're even tossing out people who, again, scored 100% on the actual test that determines qualifications, and this program existed full force, unchallenged, for 3 straight years, where all of these people were denied these applications, and the lawsuit is still working its way through the courts. Again, the lawsuit actually got certified as a class back in 2022, so it's not like these people were waiting for 9 years in order to get these positions. They've moved on to other things, and we have a shortage of air traffic controllers because it turns out these dumb people who passed this ridiculous assessment test could not still pass the cognitive test, which was the next step. It's ridiculous, it's absurd, it creates a bunch of different problems, and this is one of the reasons why at the 300 plus airports in the country where we desperately need air traffic controllers, we don't have them, because guess what? Even though this program was ended when Trump took office, it wasn't removed as an option. It was just placed after the cognitive test until 2018 when Congress passed a law prohibiting it. So you have 5 straight years of them not hiring enough people because they weren't looking for qualified people. They were trying to boost racial demographics that they preferred, and that ultimately ends up leading to overworked air traffic controllers. And in this particular instance, it has been widely reported that one of the 2 controllers that usually works till 9:30 when there's higher volume of traffic actually ended up asking to leave early just prior to the crash, and maybe that could have been a contributing factor. So yeah, when people say DAI had nothing to do with it because white man air traffic controller, in reality, they don't understand the full impact and full effect of these programs because they do damage in the system for years. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the disaster at the FAA. Till next time.